The sound of his hand hitting my face cut through that ballroom like a blade. 1 second, 2 seconds, 30 people frozen, champagne glasses suspended mid-air, someone's fork hitting a plate, the only sound in the entire room. I didn't stumble. I didn't cry. I raised my hand, slowly touched my cheek, and turned to look at him. Really look at him. Dominic Ashford Voss, the man Atlanta called a visionary, the man I had called my husband for 3 years, was staring back at me with that look he always got when he thought he'd won. He had no idea. Standing in that ballroom at the Whitley Hotel on Peachtree Road, surrounded by every board member, every investor, every person whose opinion he had spent his entire life chasing, he still had no idea that I owned 51% of everything he thought was his. He thought that slap would silence me. It was the last mistake he ever made. Drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from and what time is it there? Subscribe if you haven't, because you need to hear every second of what happened next. Now let me take you back 4 years ago to the night I met a man who looked at me like I was everything he'd ever wanted. I know now he was right, just not in the way I thought. My father used to say that money is just paper until you understand what it represents: power, options, the ability to walk away. Senator Roland Caldwell taught me that lesson at 9 years old, sitting at the kitchen table in our house on Ardmore Road in Charlotte, North Carolina, watching him sort through financial statements the way other fathers sorted through baseball cards. He didn't hide the numbers from me. He explained them, every single one. By the time I was 12, I could read a balance sheet. By 16, I understood compound interest well enough to tutor my classmates. By the time I walked across the stage at Wharton at 22, I had already drafted the business plan for what would become Caldwell Capital Group, a private investment firm built on one principle. My father drilled into me so deep it became bone: never let anyone hold the keys to what is yours. I wish I had remembered that principle the night I met Dominic Voss. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I was 37 years old when this story really begins. 37, living in a 2,800 square foot penthouse in Buckhead, Atlanta. 15th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over Piedmont Park. I had built Caldwell Capital from nothing into a firm managing over $60 million in private investments. I had a reputation in Atlanta's financial circles that I had earned dollar by dollar, decision by decision, over a decade of work that cost me 2 relationships, 3 vacations I never took, and more Saturday mornings than I care to count. I was proud. I was focused. And if I am being completely honest with you, I was lonely in the specific way that successful women are lonely. The kind of lonely where your calendar is full and your apartment is beautiful, and you wake up at 2 in the morning and reach for someone who isn't there. My sister Rosalind Caldwell, corporate attorney, the sharpest woman I've ever known, and the person who has never once in her life told me what I wanted to hear, had been telling me for 2 years to slow down. "You are running towards something, Naomi," she said one Sunday morning over coffee at Ponce City Market. "The problem is, I don't think you know what it is yet." She was right. I didn't. I met Dominic Ashford Voss on a Thursday evening in October at the Piedmont Park Conservancy Gala, a charity event the kind Atlanta does beautifully, all candlelight and string quartets, and people in evening wear pretending the world outside doesn't exist. I was there because one of my portfolio companies was a sponsor. I was not there to meet anyone. I had my glass of wine, my exit strategy, and my plan to be home by 9:30. He walked over without being invited. That should have told me something right there. "You've been calculating the ROI on every conversation in this room," he said, standing beside me, not looking at me, looking out at the crowd the same way I was. "I've been watching you. You assess. You decide, you move on. You haven't stayed in one conversation longer than 4 minutes all evening." I turned to look at him. Tall, dark suit. No tie, the kind of effortless presentation that takes considerable effort. Strong jaw, easy smile, the smile of a man who has been told his whole life that rooms belong to him. 4 minutes is generous for most of these conversations, I said. He laughed, and it was a real laugh, not the performative chuckle of a man trying to charm. Or so I thought. His name, he told me, was Dominic Voss, as in Voss Industries, the Atlanta-based luxury brand development company. His father, Harrington Voss, had built over 40 years into a regional institution. Hotels, high-end retail partnerships, architectural consulting for premium developments, a name that meant something in the South. What he did not tell me that evening, what I would not discover until much later, was that Voss Industries was quietly drowning. 3 years of mismanagement under Dominic's leadership had burned through the company's reserves. The brand his father built was leveraged to its limit. Dominic Voss was standing in that ballroom looking like a man at the top of his game, while his company was 3/4 away from collapse. But that night, I didn't know any of that. That night, I just knew that he was the first man in longer than I could remember who talked to me like I was interesting. Not impressive, not intimidating. Interesting. There is a difference, and I felt that difference like sunlight after a long winter. We talked for 47 minutes. I know because I checked my watch when he walked away and I was surprised. Roz called me the next morning. I had texted her his name the night before, the way you do when you meet someone and your stomach does something unexpected. Dominic Voss, she said, and I could hear her already typing. Voss Industries. His father died 2 years ago and left him the company. A pause. Naomi. Their last 2 quarterly filings were not good. I know how to read a filing, Roz. I know you do. That's not what I'm saying. Another pause, the kind Roz takes when she is choosing her words carefully, which she rarely needs to do. There's something about how he looked at you last night. You sent me that photo from the event photographer, and I don't know how to explain it exactly. But he doesn't look at you the way a man looks at a woman he's attracted to. How does he look at me? She was quiet for a moment. Like he's already decided something. Like you're a problem he's already solved. I told her she was being dramatic. I told her I was a grown woman who had been managing 9 figures in investments since before most people her age had a 401k, and I think I could read a man's intentions. I believed every word I said. The next 4 months moved the way things move, when you are falling faster than you expect, and by the time you notice the speed, the ground is already close. Dinners that turned into long walks that turned into weekends. A man who remembered the exact coffee order I mentioned once in passing, who showed up to my office one rainy Tuesday with Ethiopian takeout because I had mentioned offhand that I was working through lunch. A man who looked at my work, really looked at it, and said, "You built something extraordinary, Naomi. Your father would be proud." My father had been gone for 2 years. Those 7 words undid me in a way I am not entirely comfortable admitting. I introduced him to Roz at dinner at Bones Restaurant on Piedmont Road 6 weeks in. Roz was polite the way she is polite when she has already made up her mind about something and is simply being respectful of your process. Afterward, walking to our cars, she waited until Dominic was out of earshot and said quietly, "There's something wrong with the way he looks at your money, Naomi, not like a partner looks at it, like a predator does." I laughed. I told her she was projecting. I hugged her goodnight and drove home thinking about the way Dominic had reached across the table and covered my hand with his when I talked about missing my father. I laughed off the most important warning of my life. Lord, how I wish I hadn't. We got married 11 months after that gala. Small ceremony at a historic estate outside Savannah Magnolia. Trees late afternoon light, 40 guests who all said we looked like we were made for each other. Roz stood next to me at the altar with a smile that reached her eyes just enough to be convincing. She had made her peace with it, she told me. Or at least, she had made her peace with me. The first year was good. I want to be honest about that because it matters. It wasn't a performance on both sides. At least I don't believe it was entirely. There were Sunday mornings on the terrace with coffee and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution spread between us. There were drives down to Tybee Island on long weekends, windows down his hand on the back of my neck. There were evenings when he would sit in the armchair across from my desk while I finished a call just reading, comfortable in the silence, the way people are only comfortable when they actually want to be where they are. I want you to hold on to that image, because what came after is so ugly that it would be easy to rewrite the beginning as all bad. It wasn't. And the fact that it wasn't is exactly what made everything that followed so devastating. What I know now that I didn't know then is that I had agreed 6 months into our marriage, in the middle of restructuring the Voss Industries investment, to sign a revised shareholder services agreement. Dominic's attorney had presented it as routine administrative paperwork. Roz was traveling for a case in D.C. that week. I reviewed it myself. It looked routine. I signed it. I did not notice the clause buried in Section 7, subsection C, that reclassified my voting rights on operational decisions under a certain threshold. It was carefully worded, expertly buried, and it was the first brick removed from the foundation of everything I owned. I didn't know that yet, so I lived in the good mornings and the Tybee Island drives and told myself that Roz had been wrong. The first crack appeared quietly, the way foundation damage always does invisible, until suddenly it isn't. It was a Wednesday evening in March, 14 months into our marriage. I came home from the office to find Dominic on a call in his study door not quite closed. I wasn't eavesdropping, I was walking past, but I heard enough. "She doesn't need to be in that meeting," he was saying, low voice, certain voice. "Handle it through my office. She'll sign whatever I bring home." I stood in the hallway for 3 seconds. Then I kept walking to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood at the counter trying to figure out what I had just heard and whether it meant what I thought it meant. When he came out 20 minutes later, I asked casual as I could manage how work was going. He said fine. He asked what I wanted for dinner. I said I wasn't hungry. He kissed my forehead and went to change his clothes. "She'll sign whatever I bring home." I turned that sentence over in my mind for a week. Every angle, every possible innocent interpretation. Maybe it was a different context entirely. Maybe I had misheard a word. Maybe. And this is the one I kept coming back to, the one that shames me now. Maybe I was looking for problems because some part of me had never fully believed I deserved something this good. That is what loving someone can do to your intelligence. It doesn't make you stupid. It makes you desperately creative in finding reasons not to see what is directly in front of you. The second crack came from an unexpected direction. I ran into Priya Anand at a Women in Finance luncheon at the Loudermilk Conference Center in Midtown Atlanta. Priya had been CFO of Voss Industries until Dominic terminated her contract 8 months before I came into the picture. I knew who she was. We had never spoken. She saw me from across the room and I watched something move across her face, a decision being made, and then unmade, and then made again. She came over. We made small talk about the panel discussion. And then just as we were about to part ways, she said very quietly, almost to herself, "There are things about the Q3 and Q4 internal transfers that don't reconcile with the external filings. I documented everything before I left." She looked at me directly. "I don't know what you know, but I thought someone should have said something sooner." Before I could respond, her colleague appeared at her elbow and pulled her into another conversation. I stood there with a canapé I hadn't eaten and a sentence I couldn't unhear. I called her office the next day. Her assistant said she was unavailable. I left my number. That evening, I mentioned to Dominic carefully offhandedly while we were cleaning up after dinner that I had run into Priya Anand at a luncheon. The reaction was so fast and so controlled that if I hadn't been watching for it, I would have missed it entirely. A half-second stillness, the kind that happens before a decision. Then smoothly, "Priya has some bitterness about how her contract ended. I'd keep your distance if I were you. She's been known to cause problems for people she feels wronged her." He said it gently, reasonably. like a man offering friendly advice. "She seemed fine to me," I said. "She always does at first." He folded the dish towel and placed it on the counter with that calm, deliberate precision he had. "Just be careful, Naomi. Not everyone who approaches you has your interests at heart." I thought about that conversation for days afterward. The way it was delivered, not angry, not defensive, but smooth, preemptive. The way a man speaks when he is already prepared for a specific conversation. Margaret Voss came to visit 3 weeks later. Dominic's mother was 71 years old and had the particular bearing of a woman who had spent decades deciding which people were worth her full attention and which were not. I had never fully landed in the first category. She made that clear in ways that required no direct statement, the slightly delayed response when I spoke, the way her eyes moved past me to Dominic when she wanted to react to something. The single comment she made at dinner that third evening, delivered with a gracious smile while reaching for the bread, Dominic could have married within certain circles that would have made the business side of things considerably simpler, but he always did follow his heart. A small laugh. Bless him for it. Dominic said nothing. He looked at his plate and let the comment sit there between us like something neither of us was going to pick up. I excused myself to the kitchen. I stood at the sink for 2 minutes, gripping the counter, breathing. And then I went back to the table and smiled and poured Margaret more wine. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Dominic breathe beside me, and I thought about a sentence I hadn't thought about in months. "She'll sign whatever I bring home." 6 weeks later, I found the receipt, and everything I had been talking myself out of suddenly had an address, a date, and a room number. The receipt was in the breast pocket of his gray Brioni suit jacket, the one he had worn to what he told me was a 2-day conference in New York. I found it on a Tuesday morning while pulling clothes for the dry cleaner. Intercontinental Miami, 1 room, 2 nights. The dates matched exactly the days he had been gone. I stood in our walk-in closet holding that small slip of paper for a long time. The closet smelled like his cologne cedar and something darker underneath. I remember that detail with a clarity that still unsettles me. The way the body keeps recording even when the mind is trying to stop processing. Miami. He had told me New York. I put the receipt in the inside pocket of my own jacket. I hung his suit back exactly as I had found it, and I went to work. I want to tell you I confronted him that night. I want to tell you I walked in with the receipt in my hand and demanded the truth. That would be the version of this story where I look stronger. But the truth is, I spent 4 days carrying that receipt around saying nothing, running every possible explanation through my head, the way I run financial projections methodically, exhaustively looking for the scenario that made the numbers work. A surprise. A client he hadn't mentioned. A last-minute change of plans he'd forgotten to tell me about. I built entire architectures of innocent explanation, and I knew even as I was building them that they were architectures of a woman who was not ready to know the truth yet. On the 5th day, I asked him. Dinner at home halfway through the meal, voice as steady as I could make it. "How was the hotel in New York?" "Fine standard, nothing special." He reached for his wine. "The conference center was better than I expected, though." "Which hotel did you stay at?" A beat. So small you would miss it if you weren't a woman who had spent 14 years reading micro-expressions in negotiation rooms. "The Marriott Marquis." "Why?" I set down my fork. "Because I found the receipt from the Intercontinental Miami in your jacket pocket." The silence lasted 4 seconds. I counted. Then his face did something I had never seen it do before. It went very, very still. Not the stillness of guilt, the stillness of calculation. And then, like a door closing, it shifted into something else entirely. "Naomi." His voice was gentle, patient, the voice of a man addressing something fragile. "We talked about this with your therapist. The anxiety spirals, the way you look for evidence of problems that aren't there. I'm holding a receipt from a hotel in Miami, Dominic, which I can explain if you'll let me finish a sentence without escalating." He leaned back in his chair, the picture of calm. I flew down to Miami for one night to meet with the Castellano group about a potential partnership. I didn't mention it because it was preliminary, and I didn't want to get your hopes up about a deal that might not materialize. I flew back connected through New York, attended the last day of the conference. It was 2 separate trips compressed into the same travel window. He looked at me steadily. I should have told you. I'm sorry I didn't. But this... He gestured between us. This is exactly what Dr. Reeves was talking about. He said it so smoothly, so completely. Every detail accounted for every gap, filled every exit sealed. And here is the part that makes me want to go back in time and shake myself by the shoulders. I almost believed him. I sat there at my own dinner table with a receipt in my hand that proved he had lied to me. And for approximately 45 seconds, I genuinely entertained the possibility that I was the problem. That is what a skilled liar does. He doesn't just lie about the facts. He lies about your ability to perceive the facts. He makes the truth feel like a symptom. You're imagining things, he said quieter now, reaching across the table to cover my hand with his. You do this when you're stressed. You know you do. I looked at his hand on mine. I thought about how many times that gesture had made me feel safe. Maybe you're right, I said. I said it to end the conversation, not because I believed it. And that was the first moment sitting at that dinner table watching him refill my wine glass with a steady hand that something cold and quiet settled into the center of my chest and did not leave. I called Priya Anand the next morning from my car parked in the deck below my office building. She picked up on the second ring like she had been expecting me. We agreed to meet the following Saturday at a coffee shop in Decatur, far enough from Buckhead that we were unlikely to see anyone either of us knew. She arrived before me already seated in the back corner, a folder on the table in front of her that she kept her hand flat on top of like she was holding something down. I want you to know I debated this for a long time, she said before I had even fully sat down. I don't do things like this. I'm not someone who... She stopped, started again. But I have a daughter, and I kept thinking about what I would want someone to do if it were her. She slid the folder across the table. Inside were printed transaction records, internal expense reports from Voss Industries, payments made over 14 months to a vendor listed as Lee Creative Consulting, amounts ranging from $3,000 a month to $8,000, no deliverables on file, no contract in the system. I flagged these internally twice, Priya said. Both times, Dominic overrode the flag and told me to reclassify the expense category. The second time, he told me if I raised it again, he would consider it insubordination. She paused. 3 weeks later, my contract was terminated. I looked at the name on the transactions, Lee Creative Consulting. Do you know who this is? I asked. Cassandra Lee, Priya said. 29 years old, no registered business entity in Georgia that I could find, no website, no portfolio, no LinkedIn presence. Just a name on a wire transfer that has been pulling money out of your company for over a year. My company. The words landed differently than she probably intended them to, because she was right, it was my company, 51% mine by the terms of my father's original investment. I sat in that coffee shop in Decatur, staring at those transaction records, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Not sadness, not anger. Something colder than either. I thought about the receipt. I thought about Miami. I thought about his hand covering mine across the dinner table. Then I thought about Roz. I closed the folder, slid it back to Priya, and asked her one question. How long have you been keeping copies? She looked at me steadily. Since the day he fired me. I nodded slowly. Good, I said. Don't stop. That evening, I drove home, made dinner, asked Dominic about his day, and listened to him talk for 40 minutes about a hotel development deal he was excited about. I laughed when he made a joke. I poured him more water. I kissed him goodnight. And the whole time behind my eyes, something had shifted. Something that felt, for the first time in months, dangerously like clarity. He moved all of his personal files off the home server 3 days later. I watched him do it from the hallway reflected in the darkened window of the study. He thought I was asleep. I hired a private investigator named Bernard Okafor, retired Atlanta, PD 22 years on the force, recommended by Roz through a contact she trusted absolutely. I met him once in person at a diner on Moreland Avenue in East Atlanta. I told him what I needed. He told me what it would cost and how long it would take. I wrote him a check and drove home and did not think about it again for 11 days, because thinking about it meant accepting what I was actually doing, hiring someone to follow my husband, and I was not ready to fully inhabit that reality. The report came back on a Thursday, 11 pages, photographs included. I read it in my car in the parking deck of my office building, doors locked, engine off. It took me 23 minutes to get through it. I know because I looked at the clock when I started and looked at it again when I finished, and sat there for a long time afterward, watching the number change. Cassandra Lee, 29 years old. Apartment on the 14th floor of a luxury building in Midtown, lease signed 18 months ago, monthly rent $3,200, consistent with the wire transfers Priya had documented. Dominic had been seen entering the building on 9 separate occasions over the 30-day surveillance period. Average visit 3 hours. Twice overnight on evenings, he had told me he was staying late at the office for overseas calls. The photographs were clinical, time-stamped, irrefutable. I sat in that parking deck and I did not cry. I want to be clear about that because people always expect the crying to come first. It didn't. What came first was a specific, almost surgical kind of clarity, the feeling of a woman who has been trying to solve an equation with a missing variable, finally finding the variable and realizing it changes every answer she has ever calculated. Everything rearranged itself, every late night, every business trip, every moment he had covered my hand with his and told me I was imagining things. It all rearranged into a shape I could finally see properly. I called Roz from the parking deck. I read her the report out loud, start to finish, in a voice that did not shake. When I finished, there was a silence between us that lasted a long time. "Okay," she said finally. Not "I told you so," not "I knew it." Just okay, the word of a woman shifting into a different gear. "Don't do anything yet. Don't say anything. Come to my office tomorrow morning at 8 and bring everything." I drove home, made dinner, sat across the table from Dominic while he talked about a project in Chattanooga, watched his mouth move, thought about 9 visits in 30 days, smiled when he smiled. Roz laid it all out the next morning. The transactions, the investigators' report, the signed shareholder agreement I had brought from my files. She put on her reading glasses and went through every page with the focused silence she gets when she is working, and when she finished, she took off her glasses and looked at me across her desk. "He's been running Cassandra Lee's living expenses through the company for over a year," she said. "That is misappropriation of corporate funds. That is a SEC matter. That is potentially criminal." She paused. "And that subsection C clause in the shareholder agreement you signed, he's been trying to use it to reclassify your voting rights. It hasn't fully worked yet because the threshold requirements weren't met. But Naomi?" She leaned forward. "He has tried to amend this agreement 3 times in the past 2 years. 3 times. Through 3 different attorneys. 3 times. While I was sleeping beside him. While I was believing him. What do I do?" I asked. "Right now, nothing. You go home. You act exactly as you have been acting. You give me time to build this properly." She held my gaze. "Can you do that?" I thought about sitting across that dinner table smiling while my stomach turned to ice. "I've been doing it for weeks already," I said. What I did not tell Roz, what I had not told anyone, was what had happened the previous Friday evening. What Dominic had done that crossed a line so completely that no amount of architectural explanation could touch it. I had been sick. A bad flu, the kind that flattens you, fever of 102, couldn't keep water down, hadn't left the bed since Thursday. Dominic had been solicitous the first day, brought me soup, checked my temperature. The performance of a caring husband. By Friday evening, he was gone. I woke up at 8 at night, burning with fever, completely alone in the apartment, and reached for my phone to call him. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I texted. No response for 2 hours. When he finally replied, it was a single line tied up with the Chattanooga team. Back late, don't wait up. I lay in that bed with a 102-degree fever, and I thought he is with her right now. He left me sick and alone in this apartment, and he is with her right now. Bernard's report later confirmed it. Friday, October the 14th, 7:45 in the evening. Dominic entering Cassandra's building with a bottle of wine. I was in bed with a fever. He brought her wine. That detail, more than the photographs, more than the receipts, more than any of it, is what extinguished the last ember of doubt I was carrying. Not dramatically, not with tears or screaming, just quietly, completely, like a light going out in a room you've already left. The following week was when Dominic's behavior shifted in a new direction, a direction that made Roz's warning about acting carefully feel suddenly urgent. He came home one evening from a dinner with what he called strategic partners. I smelled bourbon before he reached the kitchen and stood in the doorway watching me work at the dining table. I looked up. Something in his expression was different, looser, more exposed. You know what your problem is, Naomi? He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You think because you understand numbers, you understand everything. You think that brain of yours makes you untouchable. I set down my pen. How was dinner? He ignored the redirect. I built something real. Something with my hands, my name, my relationships. And you, he gestured at my laptop, my files, my work. You just move money around. That's not building anything. That's just math. I looked at him for a long moment. You should get some sleep, Dominic. You don't even understand half of what goes on in this company, he said, and his voice had taken on that particular edge, not quite shouting something more controlled and therefore more deliberate. You're a figurehead, baby. A very expensive, very decorative figurehead. You always have been. He said it like he had been saving it, like it had been sitting behind his teeth for a long time, and the bourbon had simply unlocked the door. He went to bed 20 minutes later. I sat at that dining table in the silence he left behind, and I wrote down his exact words in the Notes app on my phone, time-stamped the way my father taught me to document everything that might matter later. Then I called the estate attorney first thing the next morning. Because something about the word figurehead, the ease with which he used it, the certainty made me feel like there was something I still didn't know. I was right. I just wasn't prepared for how right I was. The estate attorney's name was Gerald Humphreys. 70 years old, semi-retired, had handled my father's affairs for the last 18 years of his life. His office was on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Street, small, deliberately understated, the kind of office that belongs to a man who has nothing left to prove. He had called me twice in the past year about routine matters. I had always called back promptly. This time, I called him first. He was quiet for a moment when I told him why I was calling. Then he said, in the careful voice of a man who has been holding something and is relieved to finally set it down, I think it's time we had a conversation in person, Naomi. There are things about the original investment structure that I should have walked you through more carefully after your father passed. I owe you that. I sat across from him 2 days later, a Thursday morning rain coming down hard against his office windows. He had a file on the desk between us, thick, organized with the precision of a man who had been expecting this meeting for some time. He started from the beginning. When my father, Senator Roland Caldwell, had invested in Voss Industries 14 years ago, before Dominic took over from his father, before any of this, he had structured the investment specifically, not as a passive stake, as a controlling interest. 51% with full voting rights on all major operational and governance decisions, transferable in full to his estate and subsequently to me as sole heir. The agreement was ironclad. My father had made sure of that. Your father knew Harrington Voss well. Gerald said. He respected him. But he was also a senator for 22 years, and he understood that circumstances change, and people change, and agreements need teeth. He folded his hands on the desk. He structured this so that no subsequent amendment could reduce your controlling interest without your explicit witnessed and notarized consent, not your signature on a standard services agreement, your explicit, specific, informed consent to a shareholder restructuring. I thought about the document I had signed. Section 7, subsection C. The agreement I signed 18 months ago is not valid as an amendment to the original investment terms, Gerald said. I reviewed it when Dominic's attorney filed it for registration. It was an attempt to reclassify your voting rights through a services agreement rather than a proper shareholder restructuring, which would have required your full informed consent and independent legal counsel. He paused. I should have called you immediately. I flagged it internally and intended to reach out, and then, a slight tightening around his eyes, I received a call from Dominic's attorney suggesting that you were aware of and fully supportive of the reclassification and that contacting you separately would be an unnecessary complication. The rain hit the window. I heard it the way you hear things when your body is very still. He told your office that I already knew, I said. Yes. And you believed him. A long pause. I should have called you regardless. I am sorry, Naomi. That was a failure on my part. I looked at the file on the desk. How many times did he try to amend the agreement? Gerald opened the file. 3 attempts over 2 years. The first through a services reclassification, the one you inadvertently signed. The second through a proposed merger structure that would have diluted all existing shareholder positions. The third, he turned a page, was the most aggressive. 6 months ago, his legal team filed a petition arguing that your father's original investment terms were unenforceable under current Georgia corporate statute. That petition was reviewed and rejected. 3 attempts, 2 years. While he was bringing me soup when I had a fever and covering my hand with his across the dinner table and telling me I was imagining things. Gerald slid a document across the desk. There is one more thing. It was a printed email chain. Dominic's personal email address, the one I knew corresponding with an attorney I did not recognize. The chain was dated 16 months ago, 4 months into our marriage. I read it slowly. In the 3rd email Dominic had written, once the estate transfer completes and she signs the revised shareholder agreement, we won't need her signature for anything major. The goal is to have full operational control by end of Q2. She won't contest it. She trusts me. She trusts me. She won't contest it. I set the paper down on Gerald's desk very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are not entirely reliable. She won't contest it. The room was very quiet. The rain had slowed to something softer against the glass. I became aware of the texture of the chair under my hands, the weight of my own breathing, the specific quality of silence that exists in a room where something irreversible has just happened. I thought about the night we met, the charity gala, him walking over without being invited and saying I had been calculating the ROI on every conversation in the room. How specific that observation was, how precisely targeted. He had researched me before that evening. I understood that now with complete and sudden certainty. He had known who I was before he ever crossed that room. He had known about my father's investment. He had known about the 51%. He had walked over to me at that gala, not because I was interesting, because I was the solution to his problem. Every dinner, every drive to Tybee Island, every time he said my father would be proud. Every single carefully placed moment of warmth and attention and apparent understanding, it was architecture, constructed, purposeful. The most expensive and elaborate lie I had ever been close enough to touch. The truth didn't just hurt, it gutted me. Like someone reached inside my chest and removed everything I had believed was real, leaving nothing behind but the hollow shape of where it used to be. I sat in Gerald Humphrey's office for a long time after he finished talking. He gave me that time without filling it. I was grateful for that. Then I took out my phone. I opened the Notes app. I looked at the words I had typed the previous week. Dominic's voice, time-stamped, "You're a figurehead baby," a very expensive, very decorative figurehead, and I read them once. Then I called Roz. She picked up on the first ring. I said 4 words. "You were right, all of it." Roz was silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then, "Where are you?" "Gerald Humphrey's office." "Stay there. I'm on my way." I hung up and looked out at the Atlanta skyline through the rain-streaked window. Somewhere out there, Dominic was in his office or at Cassandra's apartment or in a meeting about his hotel development in Chattanooga, living inside the absolute certainty that he had already won. I opened my father's last letter on my phone, the photograph I had taken of the final page of his journal, the one I had read the night everything broke open. His handwriting slightly unsteady near the end, but clear enough. Baby girl. If you're reading this page, things got hard. They will get harder before they get easier. But you are a Caldwell. And Caldwells don't fold. We just wait until the right moment. Then we move. Nobody can take what's yours unless you let them. I read it twice. Then I put my phone away, straightened my jacket, and waited for my sister. The specific expression she gets when she has already begun dismantling something in her head before she walks through the door. She shook Gerald's hand, sat down, reviewed every document in the file without a word, and when she finished, she looked at me across the desk and said, "He made 3 critical errors." I waited. First error, he tried to amend the original agreement through a services reclassification instead of a proper shareholder restructuring. That means every amendment attempt is void on its face. Your 51% is completely intact exactly as your father structured it. She held up 2 fingers. Second error, he put it in writing. That email chain is not just evidence of intent to defraud. It is a documented conspiracy to deprive you of your shareholder rights. That is a federal matter, Naomi, not just civil. 3 fingers. Third error, and this is the one that is going to cost him everything. She paused, and something moved across her face that I recognized as the closest Roz ever gets to satisfaction. He underestimated you. Gerald Humphreys, 70 years old and semi-retired, looked between us and said quietly, "What do you need from me?" "Everything in that file," Roz said. "Certified copies and your testimony if it comes to that." "You have it," he said. No hesitation. We sat in that office for 2 more hours building the foundation of what came next. By the time we walked out onto Peachtree Street into the cooling, late afternoon air, I had a clearer picture of my own situation than I had possessed at any point in the previous 3 years of my marriage. The clarity was not comfortable, but it was solid. And solid ground, even when it is painful, is better than beautiful quicksand. Roz walked with me to my car. At the door, she stopped and looked at me with the direct, undecorated honesty that has always been her greatest gift to me. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." "No, well, when have I ever not?" "Do you still love him?" I thought about it. Really thought about it, not the reflexive denial, not the performance of a woman who has moved past feeling. I thought about the drives to Tybee Island, the armchair across from my desk, the 7 words about my father. "I loved who I thought he was," I said finally. "That person doesn't exist. You can't love a fiction." Roz nodded once. "Good, because what I need from you over the next few weeks is going to require you to be very, very cold." I looked at her. "How cold?" "Absolute 0, she said, and got in her car. The plan came together over the following 10 days. Roz, Gerald, and a corporate litigation attorney named David Park, one of the 3 names my father had written in his journal, which I had looked up the day after reading that final page and found exactly as my father had described, sharp, discreet, and completely unafraid. David had handled 2 major shareholder disputes in Georgia in the past 5 years, both resulting in full restoration of controlling interest to his clients. The target was the Voss Industries annual Gala, 3 weeks away. I want to explain why the Gala, because it was not arbitrary and it was not theatrical. Under Voss Industries' corporate bylaws, the annual gala doubled as the required annual general meeting of record. Every board member was contractually obligated to attend. Every vote cast at that meeting was legally binding. And under the original investment agreement my father had written with Harrington Voss, the agreement that Gerald confirmed was still fully intact. I had the right, as controlling shareholder, to call an emergency governance vote at any properly convened general meeting, provided I submitted written notice to all board members no fewer than 14 days in advance. Roz submitted that notice on a Monday morning to all 7 board members. By certified mail and electronic delivery, time-stamped legally, unimpeachable. All 7 received it. Dominic did not, because under the conflict of interest provisions that applied when the subject of the vote was the CEO's own conduct, he was not entitled to advance notice. He had no idea anything was coming. I went home that evening and made pasta and opened a bottle of wine and sat across from my husband at our kitchen table and listened to him talk about the gala. How important it was this year, how the venue was perfect, how he had secured commitments from 2 new investors who would be in the room. He was animated in the way he got when he felt powerful, leaning forward, hands moving that particular light in his eyes that I had once found magnetic. "You should wear the burgundy dress," he said, refilling my glass. "The one from the Piedmont fundraiser. You look good in that one." I looked good in that one. I filed the phrasing away without expression. "I'll think about it," I said. Priya came on as a formal cooperating witness. The following week, David Park handled the documentation. Roz handled the logistics. Gerald provided the corporate records. Priya brought everything she had saved in 2 years of careful, quiet documentation. Transaction records, internal communications, the original flag reports she had submitted before being terminated, and most critically, a 7-minute audio recording she had made during a meeting in Dominic's office 4 months before her termination. A recording in which Dominic's voice unmistakably clearly discussed redirecting vendor payment structures specifically to avoid internal audit detection. When I listened to that recording for the first time in David Park's conference room, I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, something quieter and more permanent. The feeling of a door closing on a room you have finally finished examining. The hardest part of those 3 weeks was the performance. Coming home every evening, sleeping in the same bed, answering his questions about my day with enough detail to sound genuine and not enough to give anything away. Watching him live inside his certainty like a man who has already spent his winnings. 4 days before the gala, he came home in a particular mood. He had been drinking not heavily, just enough to loosen the careful management he usually applied to his own presentation. He sat across from me in the living room, and for a long moment, he just looked at me with that calculating stillness I had learned to recognize. "You know what I've been thinking about," he said. "Tell me. How much simpler everything is going to be in about 6 months. A slow smile. "Some restructuring I've been planning, long overdue. Should have done it 2 years ago, honestly." He swirled his glass. "The day you actually try to use that 51% against me is the day I remind you of exactly what you are." He said it conversationally, almost warmly, like he was sharing something generous. I held his gaze. I smiled at him across that living room, a slow, easy smile that gave away absolutely nothing. "That's an interesting thought," I said. He laughed and went to bed. I sat in the living room alone for a long time after his light went out, not planning, not replaying, just sitting in the silence of a woman who knows exactly what is coming and is no longer afraid of it. 3 days, I thought. Let him enjoy 3 more days. The morning of the gala, I woke up at 5:30. Dominic was still asleep beside me, one arm thrown over his face the way he always slept, completely at ease, completely untroubled, the sleep of a man with no idea that the ground beneath him had already been removed. I lay there for a few minutes just listening to him breathe, not with tenderness, with something that had no clean name, the feeling of standing at the end of something long and looking back at the full length of it for the last time before you turn away. Then I got up, made coffee, and went over everything one final time. Roz had confirmed the night before that all 7 board members had received and acknowledged the notice of governance vote. David Park had filed the formal conflict of interest documentation with the corporate secretary that afternoon, which meant the vote was legally insulated from any procedural challenge Dominic might attempt. Gerald Humphreys had provided certified copies of the original investment agreement, the 3 failed amendment attempts, and his own written account of the conversation in which Dominic's attorney had falsely represented my awareness of the reclassification. Priya had the transaction records, the internal audit flags, and the 7-minute audio recording all submitted to David's office in a sealed evidentiary package that would be presented to the board at the appropriate moment. Everything was in place, every exit sealed, every variable accounted for. My father's voice in my head, the way it always came when I was about to make a significant move. Know your position before you enter the room, baby girl, and never let them see you calculating. I wore the black dress, not the burgundy one Dominic had suggested. A column of matte black crepe long sleeves, completely simple, the kind of dress that does not ask for attention and therefore commands it. My mother's sapphire earrings, the ones I wore only when I needed to feel her close. Low heels because I intended to be standing for a long time, and I intended to be comfortable. Dominic came downstairs at 7 and stopped when he saw me. "I thought you were wearing the burgundy." "I changed my mind," I said, and handed him his coffee. He looked at me for a moment with that slight narrowing of the eyes he got when something had moved outside his expectations. Then he let it go and checked his phone, and the moment passed. We drove to the Whitley Hotel on Peachtree Road in his car, mostly in silence. Dominic was in a particular kind of mood, the elevated, slightly pressurized energy of a man preparing to perform for an important audience. He talked about the evening's agenda, the new investors he was expecting, a toast he had prepared. He straightened his cufflinks at a red light. I watched the city move past the window and said the right things at the right intervals, and felt underneath all of it the absolute stillness of a woman on the far side of fear. Roz was already in the ballroom when we arrived, seated at a table near the east wall with David Park and a corporate records notary. She was wearing deep burgundy. We had not coordinated this, but when our eyes met across the room, she smiled the small private smile of a woman who appreciates an irony. Priya was at the far side of the room, seated with 3 of the independent board members, her folder closed on the table in front of her. I had been in the room for 11 minutes when the first thing went wrong. Cassandra Lee was there. I had not known she would be there. Dominic had listed her on the guest manifest as a brand strategy consultant, a designation that I understood immediately he had arranged specifically to have her present for what he believed was going to be his evening of triumph. She was standing near the bar in a gold dress, holding a glass of champagne with the relaxed entitlement of a woman who has been told she belongs somewhere. She saw me at the same moment I saw her. She came over. Of course she did. She looked me up and down with a slow, deliberate assessment, the kind designed to be noticed, and then smiled the smile of a woman who believes she holds every card. "He told me you'd be wearing something boring," she said, her voice low and pleasant. "He said you always play it safe. He's never wrong about you." I looked at her for a moment. She was 29 years old and very beautiful and completely certain of her position in this room. I felt nothing toward her that resembled hatred. What I felt was closer to a specific kind of sadness for the version of herself she did not yet know she was about to have to reckon with. "Enjoy the evening," I said quietly. "It's the last one." She laughed a bright, dismissive sound and turned back to the bar. 20 minutes later, Dominic found me. He had seen us talking. His jaw was set in the way it got when his control over a situation felt compromised, and he took my arm and moved me toward a quieter corner of the room with the smooth social fluency of a man who has spent years managing appearances. "What did she say to you?" He said, low and precise. "Nothing important?" I said. "Naomi." His grip on my arm tightened slightly. "I need tonight to go smoothly. I need you to stay in your lane tonight. Can you do that for me? Stay in your lane." I looked up at him. He was close enough that I could see the slight tension around his eyes, the performance of control beginning to require visible effort. And underneath that tension, still present, still fully intact, the absolute bedrock certainty that this evening belonged to him. "Of course," I said. He held my gaze for one more second, searching for something. Then he released my arm, smoothed his jacket, and moved back toward the center of the room. I watched him go. The way he moved through that crowd, every handshake calibrated, every laugh, timed every gesture of warmth, deployed with the precision of a man who has never once in his life given anything away for free. He reached the center of the room, accepted a fresh champagne glass from a passing server, and turned to survey the space with the satisfaction of a man standing in the middle of everything he owns. He caught my eye from across the room, raised his glass slightly, the gesture of a man acknowledging his wife decoratively graciously from a comfortable and permanent distance. I raised mine back. Then I looked over at Roz. She gave me the smallest nod, barely a movement, barely anything at all. It had begun. What neither of us had fully planned, for what no one in that room could have anticipated, was that Dominic had his own move ready for that evening. A move he had been preparing quietly the way he prepared everything. 45 minutes into the gala, he stepped onto the low platform at the front of the room, tapped his champagne glass, and waited for the room to settle. Then he smiled the smile of a man about to deliver a killing blow. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice warm and carrying, "before we get into the formal portion of the evening, there's something I'd like to address. A small housekeeping matter involving our shareholder structure." A relaxed, almost apologetic laugh. "Specifically, a recent notice of governance vote that I understand some of you received." Yatamfer, he paused, looking around the room with the easy authority of a man in complete command. "I've had my legal team review the notice thoroughly this afternoon, and I'm pleased to tell you that it is without question procedurally invalid." The room was very quiet. He was looking directly at me, smiling. He kept smiling at me from that platform, the smile of a man who has just played what he believes is his final card and is waiting for the table to acknowledge it. The room was held in that particular suspended silence, 30 people reading the air, sensing something larger than a housekeeping matter, not yet certain which direction the weight was falling. I set my champagne glass down on the nearest table. Slowly, deliberately, the way you set something down when you no longer need it. Then I walked toward the platform. Dominic watched me come. His smile held confident, almost curious, the expression of a man who is prepared for every contingency and is mildly interested to see which one I was attempting. He had his legal team's opinion. He had his certainty. He had spent 46 years in rooms like this one, being the most powerful person in them. I stepped up onto the platform beside him. He leaned slightly toward me and said very quietly, meant only for me, with the particular cruelty of a man delivering a final verdict. "You should have stayed in your lane, Naomi. I gave you every opportunity, but you just couldn't accept what you actually are, could you?" Not a question. A pronouncement. "You're not sorry about trying this, but you're going to be." He straightened up, turned back to the room, opened his mouth to continue. "Actually," I said, "I'd like to respond to that." My voice carried. Clear level, completely unhurried, the voice I use in boardrooms when I've already won and am simply completing the formality of demonstrating it. Dominic turned to look at me. Something shifted in his expression, the first hairline fracture in the certainty. Not fear yet, just the recognition that something had moved outside the parameters of his model. Dominic's legal team did review the notice of governance vote this afternoon, I said, addressing the room. What they reviewed was a copy I asked David Park to send them at 2 o'clock today, a courtesy notification, not the filing itself. I paused. The actual filing with full supporting documentation was submitted directly to each board member and the corporate secretary at 9 o'clock this morning. by certified electronic delivery with time-stamped confirmation receipts. It has been valid and on record for 14 hours. I looked at Dominic. The vote is proceeding. The silence in that room was a different quality now, heavier, charged. Roz was already moving. She stepped forward with David Park beside her, and David placed a bound documentation package on the nearest table, 7 copies, one for each board member, already waiting at their seats placed there 40 minutes ago by the corporate notary, while Dominic had been working the room. "What you have in front of you," David said, addressing the board with the calm efficiency of a man who has done this before, "is a certified record of 3 attempts by the current CEO to amend the controlling shareholder agreement without proper disclosure or informed consent in direct violation of the original investment terms. Also included 14 months of internal transaction records documenting the systematic misappropriation of corporate funds to a personal vendor account, and a sworn statement from the company's former CFO supported by contemporaneous documentation." Priya stood up from her seat, composed, precise. "I can answer any questions the board has regarding the financial records." Dominic turned to me. The smile was gone. In its place was something I had never seen on his face before, a look of pure, unguarded disorientation, like a man who has stepped onto ground that was not where he expected it to be. "You can't," he started. His voice had lost its carrying quality. It came out smaller. "This is Naomi. This is not—" "There's one more item," I said. I nodded to David. He reached into the documentation package and produced a small device, a speaker, and placed it on the table. He pressed play. Dominic's voice filled the room. Unmistakable. Recorded in his own office in his own words. 4 months before Priya's termination, redirect the vendor payment structures through the secondary classification. That way, it clears internal audit without triggering a flag. Lee gets paid, the books look clean. Nobody asks questions. 7 board members, 30 guests, complete silence. I watched it happen to him in real time. The color left his face in a single visible wave, starting at his jaw and moving upward until his skin was the gray white of a man whose body has registered catastrophe before his mind has caught up. His right hand, holding his champagne glass, began to tremble. Not slightly. Visibly, unmistakably, the glass shaking until the champagne moved in small, agitated circles. He set it down hard on the edge of the platform, and it tipped and fell shattering on the ballroom floor. The sound cut through the silence like a period at the end of a very long sentence. His other hand gripped the edge of the podium. His voice cracked. That voice, the one that had told me I was imagining things, told me I was a figurehead, told me to stay in my lane, cracked down the middle like something that had been under too much pressure for too long. "This recording it's out of context. This is not what it—" "Dominic." Margaret Voss's voice came from the left side of the room. I had not seen her face until that moment. She was standing very still, her champagne glass held at her side, and she was looking at her son with an expression I will never forget. Not shock, not horror, but something colder. The look of a woman reckoning with a specific fear she has been carrying for years. "What did you do?" He looked at his mother. His knees buckled a visible involuntary drop, and he grabbed the podium with both hands. The board chair, a man named William Ossie, who had sat on the Voss Industries board for 11 years, stood up. "I think we need to proceed with the vote." It took 4 minutes. Electronic ballot conducted on the tablets David Park's team had placed at each board member's seat before the gala began. The results displayed on the presentation screen at the front of the room, the same screen Dominic had used for his annual address 3 years running. 6-1. Immediate removal of Dominic Ashford Voss as CEO, pending full forensic audit of all financial records from the past 3 years. I watched him read the number on that screen. 6-1. He read it the way a man reads something in a language he suddenly cannot understand, blinking, leaning forward slightly, as if proximity might change what the words said. From across the room near the bar, I saw Cassandra Lees set down her champagne glass, pick up her evening bag, and walk toward the exit without looking back. No hesitation, no glance in his direction. The specific practiced exit of a woman cutting a loss. Dominic saw it too. He turned to me. His eyes were wet, not crying, something rawer than crying, the involuntary filling of a man whose body was responding to the total collapse of everything he had constructed. Naomi. His voice was barely above a whisper. Please, I can explain everything. We can fix this. I love you. I have always. You don't love me, Dominic. My voice was very quiet, very steady. You love what you thought you could take from me. Those are not the same thing, and I am no longer interested in explaining the difference to you. He reached for my arm. I stepped back. One clean step. Remember when you told me I was a figurehead? I held his gaze, not with hatred, not with triumph, just with the complete and permanent clarity of a woman who is done. A very expensive, very decorative figurehead. I paused. Look around this room. He looked. Board members reviewing documents. David Park speaking with William O.C. Priya answering questions with her folder open. Roz standing near the door with her arms crossed, watching him with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who has been right for a very long time. This is my boardroom, I said. It always was. I stepped off the platform, walked across that ballroom, past the shattered champagne glass, past the board members, past the table, where Cassandra's abandoned glass was leaving a ring on the white linen, and I did not look back. Not once. The morning after the gala, I woke up in the guest bedroom of Roz's house in Cascade Heights. I had not planned to stay. I had a bag packed, a hotel reservation, made a whole logistics plan prepared for the aftermath. But when Roz pulled up to her house at 11:30 that night and said simply, "Come inside, Naomi," I did. And I slept for 9 hours straight, the deepest, most complete sleep I had experienced in longer than I could accurately measure. The sleep of a woman who has finally put down something very heavy. I lay there in Roz's guest room listening to the neighborhood wake up. A dog somewhere down the street, a lawnmower starting and stopping, the particular quality of Atlanta morning light coming through curtains that someone had chosen with care and affection. I felt the absence of dread. I had not noticed until it was gone how completely I had been living inside it. The constant low-frequency vigilance monitoring his moods, measuring my words, performing normalcy over a foundation I had known for months was hollow. It had become so habitual that I had stopped recognizing it as weight. Until that morning in Roz's guest room, when I woke up and it was simply not there, and the lightness of that was so pronounced it was almost physical. I lay there for a long time, just breathing. Then I got up and went to the kitchen, and Roz handed me coffee without a word, and we sat at her kitchen table in our pajamas and did not speak for several minutes the way sisters can be quiet together without it meaning anything except that they are comfortable. Finally, she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. "Like myself," I said. "For the first time in 3 years, exactly like myself." She nodded once, drank her coffee. That was enough. The weeks that followed were not easy. I want to be truthful about that because the story does not end at the ballroom, and pretending otherwise would be a disservice to anyone who has been where I have been. Divorce proceedings in Georgia take time even when they are uncontested, and ours were not uncontested for the first 2 months. Dominic's attorney made several aggressive motions that David Park and Roz dismantled one by one with the patience of people who knew the ground they were standing on. The SEC opened a formal investigation into the Voss Industries financial records within 3 weeks of the gala. The forensic audit David had requested turned up what Priya had always known was their systematic misappropriation of corporate funds totaling just under $400,000 over 31 months, all traceable to the Lee Creative Consulting account. The figure, when it appeared in the formal filing, had a clarity to it that was almost merciful. not a gray area, not a matter of interpretation. Just a number and a name and a record of exactly where the money had gone. The criminal referral came 6 weeks later. Dominic's attorney negotiated a plea arrangement that avoided the most serious federal charges in exchange for full financial restitution and a permanent bar from serving as an officer or director of any publicly registered company. He lost the Buckhead house. It had been purchased with funds from our joint account, which the divorce settlement addressed with the precision that Roz applied to everything she touched. He lost the car. He lost the membership at the Piedmont Driving Club that he had held for 11 years and considered a cornerstone of his identity. He lost Cassandra Lee, who had filed a civil suit against him for breach of financial promises within 30 days of the gala, using with considerable irony the same law firm he had initially hired to amend my shareholder agreement. That case settled quietly 4 months later. Margaret Voss called me once in the 3rd month on a Sunday afternoon. I almost did not answer. When I did, she was silent for a moment, and then she said in a voice stripped of its usual architecture, "His father would have been ashamed." She paused. "I want you to know that I saw things I should not have dismissed. I owe you an acknowledgement of that." It was not an apology, exactly, but it was the closest Margaret Voss was constitutionally capable of coming to one, and I accepted it for what it was. "Thank you for calling Margaret," I said, and I meant it. I appointed Priya Anand as interim CEO of Voss Industries the week the divorce was finalized. She walked into that office and within 90 days had restructured the vendor agreements, rebuilt the internal audit function, and negotiated a partnership with a regional hospitality group that added genuine value to the brand for the first time in 4 years. She was exactly what that company had always needed and been denied. 6 months after the gala, I signed the papers selling the majority of my Voss Industries stake at a valuation 30% higher than my original investment. My father's principle fully realized, know your position, know your exit, and never let sentiment cost you what clarity could have protected. I found my house in Inman Park on a Tuesday in February. Not a penthouse, not a showpiece, a 1920s craftsman bungalow on Sinclair Avenue, 2 bedrooms, a deep front porch, a backyard with an old oak tree, whose roots had lifted one corner of the brick path in a way the inspector flagged, and I found inexplicably reassuring. A house that had been standing for over 100 years and intended to continue. I bought it outright and painted the front door the particular shade of blue my mother had always loved, and on the first morning I woke up there, I sat on the porch with my coffee and listened to the neighborhood and felt something I recognized as home. Roz comes for Sunday mornings now. We sit on that porch and drink coffee and talk about everything and nothing. Her case is my portfolio. The oak tree, the good and ordinary textures of lives, being lived forward instead of defended. She brought me a plant for the porch last month, something with broad, dark leaves that she said was impossible to kill. I have kept it alive for 6 weeks and consider this a meaningful accomplishment. I think about my father often, the kitchen table on Ardmore Road, the balance sheets and the patience and the principle he planted in me, so deep it became bone. He knew. Not the specifics, not Dominic, not the gala, not any of it. But he knew that one day I would need to understand that what is truly yours cannot be taken. It can only be surrendered. I did not surrender it. I think about the woman I was 3 years ago sitting across a charity gala, watching a man walk toward her and feeling for the first time in a long time like something good was arriving. That woman was not foolish. She was not weak. She was a woman who wanted to be loved and made herself available to that wanting, and there is nothing in that to be ashamed of. The shame belongs entirely to the man who looked at that openness and calculated how to use it. She deserved better. I gave it to her. If you are sitting somewhere right now carrying something heavy, a relationship that has asked you to be less than you are, a situation that has required you to perform smallness, to keep the peace, a version of yourself you have been talked out of, I want you to hear this. Your clarity is not cruelty. Your self-protection is not selfishness. And the moment you decide that you are done being the most affordable option in a room full of people who should be grateful you walked in that moment is the beginning of everything. My name is Naomi Elise Caldwell. I am 41 years old, and I am exactly who my father always knew I would be. If this story moves something in you, if you've ever been made to feel like a figurehead in your own life, drop a comment below and tell me. Your words matter here. This community was built for women who refuse to stay in lanes that were never meant to contain them. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story today, share it with her. She'll know why.